Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Sunday, the Psychedelic Roundtable. We're coming at you live. It's George, and Paul. You caught us right in the middle of Paul explaining the silo cup. Paul, can you explain to people what the silo cup is?
Well, I mean, as best as I can, but it's
Okay.
it's a like remember the cannabis cup, Amsterdam
Yep.
would have it every year, and they would test weed and for potency and taste and all the rest of that stuff. Well, they do the same thing up in Oakland every year, and it's put on by a guy. His Instagram is Oakland Hyphae, and so what they do is they people grow psilocybin, they bring it to Oakland or send it there. I'm really not sure how it goes, but they he tests them. He's got a lab, and as best as he can, he tests for like potency and like the different markers that make good psychedelic mushrooms. And then I guess they award a winner every year. There's some guys up there, like Oakland is the spot right now for like that kind of stuff. There's another guy up there, Alan Rockefeller, who is like an amateur mycologist. Kind of been traveling the country and has discovered a lot of new species of mushrooms. And he too has a lab in Oakland. And he's banking like I want to say a couple thousand like slants of mycelium of various types of mushrooms and all types of psychedelic mushrooms. But if you get a chance, you get to get on Instagram and find those guys.
I think
that would be awesome.
Oh yeah, I think so too. I think the estimated species of mushrooms is in the like 8 million something, and we've only identified less than one, I believe.
Man, what if we found some new strain of mushroom that like not only allowed you to have like these incredible insights and visions, but also allowed you to, it had some attribute to it where like you could see magnetic waves or something like that. You think that's possible? Why not, right?
I think in the right set and setting, you could probably do that with any old mushroom. You just need the right dose, right? And set and setting.
Yeah.
It's just finding that magic. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was fun. People out there that are doing different blends of psychedelic mushrooms.
Mm-hmm.
And like, telling some, pretty fantastic stories about, what the two, these 2 or 3 different types of mushrooms that they consumed, kind of changed, their experience.
Yeah, I would imagine. So. Yeah. If you look at like, sativa versus
indica.
Indica, like you have a different kind of high right there. So, why wouldn't different types of mushrooms have a slightly different type of edge to them? It makes sense.
Well, so too is like the ability to, take other herbs with them. Like, people are using like spirulina and doing like psilocybin concentrates and then like a spirulina concentrate. And then, that helps like the absorption and
synergistic effects. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just like, we're just like cracking the surface of like, the possibilities of, what happens when you blend these medicines with other types of, like well-researched and, really common medicines that we've had, especially in like herbal form, in the past. And the different channels that they...
Yeah, well, we're waking up from the shadow of pharmacology. Right?
That's so well put. We're waking up from the shadow of pharmacology just put us in this haze. It was like a giant tranquilizer that just kind of put everybody out for a little while.
Right. And, now we're coming full circle, it seems.
It's the talk of the new golden age.
Yeah, for sure. It's like, I remember like our first episode when George was talking about the venomous snake, and then a plant that resembled the venomous snake was the antidote to being bit by the venomous snake. in like, South America somewhere. But, like just in our everyday lives, we're surrounded by like medicine. The Hawaiians have, like in our state constitution, we have this part. It's called Maukita Makai, and what it is it ensures that all people have access to the ocean for food, and people have access to the mountain for water and medicine.
That's awesome.
Does that, yes? So there's no I wonder how that stacks up with like illegal plants or having. Does the state law supersede that particular law?
Does the state law, what prohibition laws supersede the Maukita Makai?
Well, like, how does plants fit in there? Like, you can't grow wheat. Like, there's certain types of plants that are illegal. Like, shouldn't that be nixed because of the Maukita Makai?
Well, I mean, that's the problem is like how many of these plants were introduced that we're talking about growing for medicine, and which ones existed here, pre-discovery. So I think Maukita Makai is more in the spirit of traditional Hawaiian herbs, native Hawaiian plants, vegetation. But in a state like Hawaii, like in California, you can't possess like spores or mycelium of hallucinogenic mushrooms. In Hawaii, you can. The fruiting bodies is another. That's a whole nother story. But George, I mean, like you live in Hawaii, like over here where I live on Maui, they grow everywhere.
Yeah, you can grow spores. Yeah, and we got the right climate for it as well. At least some of them. I mean, you can't have like some of the stuff that you get in northern United States, like the weather's too warm over here for them, like the Liberty caps and that kind of stuff. But there's all kinds of tropical species that grow here for sure.
Yeah, cubensis, and Copelandia.
Yep.
Like the two, like that are different varieties of those that are growing. At least where I live, we get 100 inches, 120 inches of rain out here where I live every year. And so that, it's like, it's sun, rain, like all the time. And like, that's just like perfect weather for like certain species of mushrooms. They just pop up everywhere.
Yeah. I had this idea, like I wanted to do I think in order to get a new strain, you have to like clone it 4 different times and then grow it out. But I had this idea in my mind. Like, I think that there should be 2 new strains. Like I tried to work on one, but I only got it to clone once or twice. But one, I wanted to do like a Ross Ulbricht strain, like, cause that guy just did so much for mushrooms and so much for like, the Bitcoin community, and just that guy's just an all around awesome guy. I thought it would be amazing. And anybody listening to this, like, we should get on this. Like, we should have like a competition, maybe between like places that have legalized mushrooms, where they could grow a strain that's called the Ross Ulbricht, and every time somebody bought it, like a portion of that would go to like his family or something like that. It could be like an activist type of strain.
A real world use for an NFT.
Oh yeah, totally. Totally. Yeah. So Hank Foley, who's an awesome guy, he's been talking about cacti. Paul, why don't you fill in Hank on what kind of cacti you got going?
Oh, what kind of cacti I grow?
Yeah.
I mean, I grow all kinds. Like almost, I have several hundred, cactus that I grow here at my house, like of varieties.
Succulents, whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, some succulents. Yeah, I mean, I grow like Codex succulents, like African stuff, but mostly cactus, which includes like I grow San Pedro, like all different forms. There's like hybridized. There's varieties that grow in certain areas that have gotten, kind of famous names, that people have, taken pieces of and then grown those out and given to others. And I probably have 12 different varieties of Trichoceres pachanoi, which is the San Pedro. Other ones as well.
Are the cactus, do they grow like if you were going to grow just like any other plant, they have different strains which have different sort of attributes to them?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's why I grow one that's called Mallow 4, which is a pachanoi. I mean, it has no scientific name to it, but it's from a certain region, and it was collected long ago. I mean, there's like there's a lot of guys that are out there that are really into like the different regional types of Trichocereus pachanoi. And then like there were other, I mean, there were other hallucinogenic Trichocereus as well, but pachanoi seems to be the one that's been most cultivated. And I'm sure you guys probably have driven by it in your lives times, like especially up there in Colorado. I think there's I know some cactus growers up there that are growing a lot of Trichocereus in like greenhouse and hoop house type settings, and like really cranking them out.
Yeah, my first experience was down in Ecuador. And I had known what they were. I looked for them in quite a few different countries, but then I was in. They have this. It's called the Golden Coast, and they have I think it translates to the Sun Road, but it's basically like Highway 1 in California down in Ecuador, and it just runs up the coast. And there's this beautiful town called Montanita, which is like this old hippie town. It's wild. The music never stops. It just gets to a lower decibel in the wee hours of the morning. And then as the morning progresses, it raises back up. And it's just a perpetual party. At night, you have all these vendors come out and street hustlers and magicians and all this. It's very bohemian kind of hippie colony that just never, kind of lost to time type idea. And as I was walking up in the hills there, all of a sudden I turned around the side of the mountain and it was just like on the whole southern face, it was just nothing but San Pedro. And so here I am, a white boy, I run back, go get myself a big old black trash bag, and I'm running back up there with a machete. Yeah, that was the first time I ever found it. But yeah, it's prolific when it grows.
It is a lot of cactus growers use it for grafting stock, because
that makes sense.
Like things that grow slow, guys will scion on top of Trichocereus pachanoi grafting stock, and get those plants to grow faster. The slower growing stuff for like seed production, or to degraft it and put it back in the ground or in the pot. But yeah, I mean, it's a prolific grower.
Is the active ingredient mescaline in that?
Yeah.
And what is it like? I've never partaken in that. What does it feel like if you take that?
I mean, to me, it's more of a. So I've done it 3 times, and like each one of my experiences was like really different from the others. The first time I ever did it was just kind of like a more like mellow body experience, with not too many visual effects happening. It was just more of a I don't know. It's kind of like how's it hard to explain? But when you the onset of like a good mushroom trip where you kind of feel like the wind's blowing through your body, and you're kind of in tune with just like the nature around you, and you kind of really feel that vibe. That's, for me, that was the first time it was kind of mellow like that, and it lasted a few hours, and I was kind of unimpressed. The second time I did it was kind of wild. It was just a lot of it was more heady. It was more in my mind, more experience of just at least a mental euphoria type experience. And then the third time I did it, it was actually kind of not even fun, really. I just didn't feel like it. It felt like I just was never in tune with the medicine. I was just kind of stuck in between in between different mind states. I don't know, and that seemed to go on for quite a while.
My experience was I had that whole harvest, and this is the only time I really had the experience. But it was all fresh stuff, and trying to figure out the content and all of that was a pain in the butt, you know. And eating fresh cactus is actually not good for you, like
Yeah.
you know. So I tried a few different things before I finally like boiled down pretty much a giant, you know, almost 3.5, 4 foot cactus. It seemed like probably in total into a big pot, and I just like boiled it down for hours and hours and hours, and that tea got me to that euphoric state. It was kind of like if you ever feel that like really euphoric kind of like after golden glow of LSD, it was kind of like that for about 3 hours for me.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
you kind of visuals on there, like kind of like stuff breathing or
It was like I felt like I was attenuated with the nature around me. Yeah, it's similar to kind of how you feel on mushrooms. You could talk to the tree, and you're pretty sure you can hear the tree, but you don't want to tell people you can hear the tree. Kind of like that. But it wasn't. It was only like a 2 to 3 hour thing. Now I'm sure if I figured out, refined the different parts that I was using, and cut out other parts, I would probably get closer to it. But I was just happy I actually found something in the middle of Ecuador.
Yeah, I mean, say the dosage is like the size of your forearm, right? You like cut a piece about that big and then boil it down. There's different methods to it.
Yeah.
And I think too, like the 3 times I did it, it was prepared by 3 different people who had like 3 different methods of
That one
preparation.
yeah, I mean, preparation goes a long way into things. Just like Amanita muscarias. When you prepare that a certain way, you're eliminating, or you're favoring muscimol over the ibutenic acid, right? And so certain heats will break down, one of those while also feed the other. And, just like all chemistry, right? I think there is different preparation methods. Yeah, that's why you're probably not going to get the same ayahuasca experience in San Diego, California, as you're going to get in the middle of the Amazon in Peru.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What about, have you ever done peyote before?
I don't know.
No, me neither. Paul?
No. I haven't.
Yeah.
It's always been one of those things where I'd love to come across it. It's just I never come across it. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I've come across it.
So if I come across something, I'm like, oh, today? Sure. That sounds like a good time. Yeah.
Yeah,
that's the freedom to do what you got to do right there.
It's going to be hard too. I mean, like in places like California where they're getting ready to try to pass a law that will legalize, hallucinogens. They're basically they want to legalize like everything except for peyote. They're getting pushback. Like the Native American church is the ones that are like, no, we don't want to see that become like commercialized or.
Well, I understand the reasoning behind that. It takes a long ass time to cultivate peyote.
Right.
I think to cultivate it.
Yeah, I think it
well,
actually takes like 20 some years to really cultivate the plant, doesn't it?
It takes a long time unless you graft it on like Pacanoy.
Okay.
But or Paraskiopsis, and then it'll grow really quick. But this stuff is like highly endangered in its native habitats. And you're talking about like South Texas and then Mexico, right. Where it's just it's just getting bulldozed over and grazed over and freaking, it's increasingly more and more difficult to find these plants in their native habitats. And I mean, there's people down there like in South Texas where they're growing Lophophora williamsii, which is like the predominant Lophophora peyote that's growing in that area. And they're like rescuing thousands of plants, and they don't like when you rip one of these cactus out of the ground, you dig it out with a shovel and you move it. It's like the chances of it surviving are low. things that become highly adapted to their like one specific
Local.
like 10 square feet of earth on the planet, you know. And so moving them becomes difficult, and no one thinks about them because they're, you know, because we look at them as like this bad stuff, you know, is what we've been taught, you know, that people don't care about them, and so, you know, they're ready to, you know, send their cattle over them, you know, and they're ready to bulldoze them into the ground so they can build homes or expand highways and stuff. And it's same things happening in Mexico. You know, so it's like, for me, I'm a proponent of like, let's make these plants legalized so that we can grow them, we can cultivate them, you know, and take the pressure off of the stuff in you know, in habitat.
Yeah, I think there's a big push. I think that is one of the reasons. I read an article that talked about a lot of indigenous Americans want to keep the you know, the wild peyote for ceremonial use, and there's a lot of backlash from people that are using it for like a westernized ceremony, and there's a big pushback between peyote that is grown in a greenhouse versus peyote that's grown, you know, in a traditional area and stuff like that. I think there's a lot of pushback there. But this brings me to this I was talking to a lawyer yesterday about the idea of introducing the psychedelic experience into the big three religions. And he brought up some interesting points. What do you guys think about that? What do you think about the just starting off with like the Christian denomination becoming more of a psychedelic, like some of the really big churches becoming more psychedelic in nature?
I mean,
Go ahead, Paul.
I would argue that the inception of the big three religions, you know, was probably due to some sort of psychedelic trip.
I would second that argument. Yeah, I think, you know, there is a lot of foundations for what Christianity is based on in the psychedelic experience, and I think we can see the congruenalities through all ancient aspects of what we call our ancient theologies. You know, everywhere from the Sumerians onward. Yeah, so introducing it today, however, is a very different question than where it originated from. I think you would have a lot of people who would say, hey, you know what? I've understand what I've heard and I've read for the past 40 years of my life at a whole different level than I could have ever understood it if I listened for another 40 in the way that I was before. I also think you're going to end up with a good chunk of people who are, say, what the heck's going on? I've been lied to my entire life, you know, and you're going to see the plethora of scandals that the church really encompasses just blown out into the wild. So I don't think, because of the reasons of the scandals and the fallout of everything, I don't think you would actually see it kind of take hold. You might get like a grassroots movement type thing. And I think there already are people trying to do that, right? They're using Native American heritage to kind of justify their rituals, which on one hand, I'm kind of, you know, I like it. On the other hand, as somebody who's practiced it for a long time and understands the pitfalls aren't just small pitfalls, they can potentially be Grand Canyons of pitfalls, especially when, and we have examples of this, right? We have the Ted Bundys. We have, you know, we have the things that people use psychoactive substances in order to manipulate others into putting them into, you know, very questionable environments, and then ultimately very bad environments. And I think if you were to give all of these evangelical TV preachers this sort of power, I think you see a lot of that, unfortunately.
Yeah, it makes me wonder. I've listened to some podcasts, and I have talked to some people who have begun starting like like Christian retreats where they'll take a psychedelic and begin integrating that which happens to them, sort of like the Good Friday experiment, but like in different areas. And on some levels, like I agree with what you said. I think it's really powerful in a lot of ways. Like I think that you can, under the right circumstances, maybe get closer to your idea of God by experiencing like a prophetic state. There's and for someone who has really read up on the different prophets and understands biblical scripture, that could be a way you interpret what happens to you, and it could be a way to strengthen your faith. However, I would say that the property of boundary dissolution can become a problem, because it seems to me that a lot of the church's function is to create boundaries for people, whether they're rails to stay on or guidelines to stay on. And I think if our other friend was here, that I think he would end up saying a little bit more about that. But yeah, I do think there's room for it, and I think in some ways it would loosen the boundaries of the church, which could be good for people. It could be good to break down some of these intense boundaries between certain types of religions. What do you think, Paul?
I think it would lead to people leaving the Christian church. Is what I think, if they were to start trying to integrate, these things into like church practices. I think, for me, I'm just speaking out of personal experience. Like I've never been like a religious person. Like we didn't go to church growing up or any of that kind of stuff. But, after my first few, psychedelic experiences, like that's when I really started questioning like this whole idea of God and a lot of like, the pillars of religion. I just seemed to kind of get further away. Nothing brought me closer to any of the three, major religions. I think people would bail.
Do you think they would bail or rebel?
I think they would bail. I just think they would, I think the more people who do psychedelics, I think those people are less likely to be, religious.
I would tend to agree. I think religion is a confines more so than it is an expansion of one's mind and perception of things. Unfortunately so. I think it wasn't, necessarily the intention, but the intention magnified over generations and generations, turned into a control mechanism. Mm. And in that control mechanism, I think it's in my study of anthropology and some of the older stuff on the planet, most of our older texts don't speak of any sort of evil deities, right? There's nothing that's necessarily evil. There's no such thing as good and bad. There's essentially nuance. Except when you start to get to the points in human history where the greatest threat to humanity was other humans. And then all of a sudden you see the advent of things like hells and all of these landscapes of damnation, of purgatory, of all of these different aspects of existential, eternal damnation. Things that you don't have control of on this planet, to try to corral that, the human element of wherever these religions popped up. Now, they borrowed on the previous iterations of all of this information, and I think we're much more today than before. We're putting together this puzzle piece of how all of these were related, where they came from, what sort of, you have, an Enoch, you have a Thoth, you have a Hermes, you have, Melchizedek. In all of these characters are actually iteration of a similar character. You have flood stories, you have the Noah story, you have the Gilgamesh story, you have other ancient flood myths that all of them seem to have these tenuous little interconnections of things. And so I think once we get to that, once we start to put these pictures together, you will, people go all of a sudden, well, you guys were selling me this whole different story about eternal damnation and all this other stuff that's really bad. But yet what I see, what I feel, especially under these influences and these substances, is this vast interconnectedness of everything. Yeah, the ability for you and I to communicate at a different level. For me to tell you the one thing that I needed to tell you, but could never find the words. And, and all of a sudden it removes the appeal to authority. And I think that's fundamentally what a lot of religion has these days, is that appeal to authority. And I think that's what a lot of dictatorial systems, authoritative systems have these days too, right? It's, you don't solve your own problems, you go on and tell, whoever's in charge about your problems and let them solve it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's not a bug, that's a feature, I think, or it has become a feature, right?
It depends on your perspective.
Well, just to expand on what you just said, Ben, is that, religions are, they're based in faith. And to me, hallucinogens provide, at least for me, truth. And therefore, this idea of believing in, something that to me, isn't really rooted in logic and reason, just became even more harder to accept.
I agree with you. I have a little bit of different definition of terms. I think belief is kind of our suspension of reason, right? And I think belief, people say belief is synonymous with faith, but I really don't agree with that statement at all. Otherwise, why do you need two terms that are really completely different linguistically? I can understand if it was two terms that kind of developed in sequence, but faith and belief are two very different terms. And I think belief is that suspension of reason. But I think faith actually has a component of reason in it. And so I like the term reason faith is an interesting term that I like to explore.
Yeah, it has to have that component inside of it, within it.
Let me ask this part to you guys. Do you think that when I was talking to this gentleman, he was talking about how a lot of people today, they go to South America, not like Ben to go and live there or to reside there or learn there or to be there, but they go there specifically to have like a psychedelic journey, be it ayahuasca or some sort of ceremony like that. And this guy's point was, that's cool. You can go there and you can have the experience and you can integrate it, but can you really? Like, you're having a psychedelic experience in an environment and in a culture that's not even yours. So while you can have great benefits from it, wouldn't it be better to have a psychedelic experience in a framework that you're familiar with? And for him, he was saying that is one of the reasons why he would like to see people in Christianity who are turning to psychedelics have a framework for it. The same way people would go to, you get some white guy that goes down to the middle of South America to be in this ceremony. A lot of times it's like on a beach in a private resort, and it's not really, it's more of a commercial venue. It's a tourist attraction, right? And he's saying, like, wouldn't it be better if you had your own framework in a church here in a group of people that you could really bond with? And it just brought about the cultural aspect of it. Like, yeah, that seems like if you were wanting to have the experience, why would you want to have it in an area that is not an area you're familiar with, or how would it change? I think it would change. I think it's an interesting point worth talking about. Wouldn't it? It seems like, especially for someone who's maybe deep in the faith, if they want to try this, it would be better for them to try it in a peer group than in some foreign country, right?
Why? So they can reinforce each other's dogma? I
think it would break them out of it. Like, I think that I've had multiple experiences where I'm coming down into the psychological state of it with my friends, and I don't remember any time I'm reinforcing dogma as I am asking questions. It seems more philosophical at that point. I think it would be not only therapeutic, but like you said in an earlier part of the conversation, more questioning. Do you think that people would get together, like they'd have an aisle?
Depends on who's giving the answers, though.
Right. I would agree with that. It's going to be highly dependent on the person who's
supposed to be
the
like the church doesn't need another tool to help control people's minds here, George.
Well, I guess I should have defined it like maybe the setting, maybe. Obviously, you could have Jonestown again, without a doubt, but you could also have a retreat where people go and they don't necessarily have someone preaching to them. They could just kind of be by themselves or with a small group of people or something like that. But I think it would depend on setting.
So I think this is an important distinction, because I think the psychedelic journey is especially in the beginning, but perhaps in totality, the journey of self.
Mm.
And to try to throw it under the cloud of a dogma, or this is kind of one of the reasons I disagree with the whole South American ayahuasca trips and all of these other things, is you're putting yourself into this kind of woo-woo experience, and because of that, you're creating the placebo effect, for one. So you're moving yourself from the experience because your expectations are now entwined with your whatever your intent might be in this experience. But because you're not mindful of all this, because you are going for a 2-week experience, you're all wound up. All of your emotions are all entwined in this. You're not at peace. This is exciting. This is something that's going to change my life. This is all of these things, right? So you've removed your ability to actually do the work, to have that reflection in the black mirror, to traverse the abyss. And by doing that, I think you do a disservice to yourself. That's not to say you can't come away with something that's beneficial to you, but I think you actually don't get the work done.
Yeah, it sounds like a real hoot. Like I'm going to go and, I'm going to do 7 grams of mushrooms. Like, come join us for 7 grams of mushroom tea with Father Joseph. As he guides us through this spiritual process, as Father Joseph is sitting there saying, now son, reach down into your heart and let God, fulfill you. You know what I mean? Like that. Yeah, that'd be great. Like, talked about people on meds being fucked up from religion to begin with. That's all we need to do, is to add a little bit of this to religion and see how fucked up people get.
Amen to that.
Okay, let me try to push back on that a little bit. Like, I don't think, I think it's important to think about how beneficial religion has actually been for the world we live in. Like, if you look at the way we've come together, and I'm not saying that all religion, I'm not saying there hasn't been violence, but to say that religion hasn't been
all the violence. All the violence.
That's so funny, George.
Okay, listen.
Oh, that was good. Yeah, keep going.
Okay. So
cheers.
In times, let's think about the word faith. Like, have you ever gotten through a difficult time without having faith? Like, how do you get through difficult times? Do you believe in yourself? It depends on how you decide to interpret God. Maybe God resides within you. And if you believe that, then religion is a good thing. Religion can mean a lot of things. I probably should have defined my terms before I started. But the idea of religion, your idea of God, may be different than my idea of God. So if God resides in me and I have faith in myself, you could say that I'm religious. And if we take that bent, yeah, a ceremony where you go to pray to God, where you go to see Brother George or Brother someone, a group of like-minded people where there's not a hierarchy, where there's a group of philosophical people that have the same belief in faith, and you go to, say, you go to the top of Mauna Kea and you sit there with like a tribe of people. Like, I think that kind of religious experiment is worthwhile. So yeah, why not?
I would agree with that. But, you're also, it's the context. The context that you're placing that in is set and setting. And to place that in the context of thousands of years of recorded war and strife and struggle means that you are placing that context into your set and setting. Now, that's not to say that it can't be overcome with the intent of the group and whatnot, but still, I think when you start to play with these symbols, these ideologies, it becomes a much heavier burden than the individual is usually willing to be, subjected to in a trip like that. And I think it brings up a lot of existential questions too, in that, why would I be a part of something that has explored this type of path in the world? Was it necessary? Do I even have the knowledge to be able to ask these questions? it kicks off a series of events that are, massive. It could go in a variety of directions. And so I think I think a one-on-one individual, with somebody who is aware of what the medicine does and how to guide someone's path through the medicine, and who is aware of the individual's journey and what they're trying to accomplish, their intent. I think that's the proper path. I think when you start to get into group settings, it's one thing if you've got a whole bunch of people who've been doing this for 20 years
Right.
and have all communicated and are all on similar pages. That's a different story. That's a different experiment. If you start taking Mary Jo Sue and Bobby Joe out of the congregation and
Southerners.
feeding them stuff, you're going to end up with some problems.
Without a doubt. I would like to introduce this idea that, we always talk about history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And looking forward, which is tough to do, if we can see, like, I don't think we ever live in a world without religion. And so to say that we can shed its skin, I think is naive at best. However, it doesn't mean we can't change the shape of it. It doesn't mean that we can't harness some of its beauty to help mankind move forward.
Well,
I think there's
that's
absolutely.
what
And
we're doing.
right. What do you mean? How do you think we're doing that?
I mean actively as a global society,
Right.
us on a small level, we are doing this. These are the conversations that make that possible, right? Without us having these little roundtables, nobody speaks these words. They aren't heard. They aren't thought about. They aren't reflected upon. But just like all it takes is that one person to smile at you when you have the shittiest day, and it turns everything around, and you don't even know them. It can be one of those sentences that seems innocuous, but then all of a sudden triggers the right idea in the right person's mind, and all of a sudden you get a dissemination of whole changing of generations of humanity, moving on to a golden age. So I think we are invested in it right now. We're seeing it. And I think because of our experiences, that's why we're here. We're talking about it because we've all seen something. We've all caught the glimmer. And we understand what that glimmer is at kind of a visceral level. Our ability to articulate it is, fuck that. It's not going to happen. But we give it a shot every Sunday. So tune in, folks.
Absolutely.
Nice.
Paul, so are you convinced, Paul, that religion can be a good thing?
I mean, it can be. I mean, religion has always, it's served its purpose, and maybe 200 years ago, 300 years ago, 1,000 years ago was more important to people. But I think as we move into the future, I think it like Ben was saying, like, it's going to change. Not that it hasn't already been doing that, like, drastically over the last 1,000 years, because it has. But it's going to find itself. I mean, who knows where religion finds itself? Even 100 years from now.
Isn't religion a collective reflection of our societal exploration?
It should be.
I think it is. That sounded right to me.
Say it again. It was actually, I really like it. I want to hear it again. I want to think about it.
Oh, I just made this up. So hold on.
Okay, just beautiful. Let's go with it.
Isn't religion a reflection of our collective societal exploration into the unknown? How about that?
I don't know. Like, I don't know if it's collective, because I think there's a small group of people that force the view. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of top down.
But it kind of starts off as the collective, though, right?
It should, yeah.
But it's still the collective.
Help it that some people want to be in charge.
Well, and then eventually, things do or don't come out into the greater zeitgeist of things, and that it does have changes the direction, right? But that's still the collective of our society. It just the small group of people who think they're pulling all the strings. Well, that's all fine and dandy, but everybody else is still going their own directions. So I think the collective in that term of the sense of humanity.
Would you differ? Like, that definition seems it could be interchanged with culture. Could that be also?
I don't know. Culture. I think culture is defined much more locally. I think culture might be in a similar vein, and it might be defined upon similar terms, but it's defined in a much more local environment. I think when we're talking about religion, we're talking about this massive existential uh, inability to understand what we observe around us. And it's been that perpetual movement to understand that infinite all out there that is the foundational movement of religions. But it's also the reflection of kind of what is foundationally motivating as a human being.
I mean, there's places where religion defines culture. You know, these things are so tightly intertwined that
Sure.
there's
You can't extrapolate
break them
one
apart
from the other. Yeah.
What if, like, let's just do a thought experiment. Like, if you were just to put on your wizard hat or your look into the future hat, how could you see religion evolving in the next 100 years?
I don't know if evolving is the word. I mean, devolving is more the word that I would use.
Okay, tell me what you think it would look like in 100 years.
In 100 years, man, I don't know. It depends on what part of the earth we're talking about.
Let's say in America.
In America, you know, seems to be, you know, a couple warring factions right now, you know, in America, and some are trying to drag us, you know, back 100 years, 200 years, and using religion as a tool to do that. And then there are groups that are trying to, you know, propel us forward, and they're also using religion to do that as well. And so, like, you know, I think it's pretty obvious in just like the state of America, you know, there's a real battle going on here. And so I think ultimately within the next, you know, 15 to 20 years, we'll start to see who's going to win that battle. But if you ask me right now, I think the religious groups that are trying to drag us back into the, you know, 15th and 16th century, I think they're winning.
So you see sort of a revival to a renaissance of the 1500s or something.
Well, I mean, so like what we're seeing right now is, you know, religion and a culture, you know, that are closely intertwined, you know, and even 4 or 5 years ago, you know, their methodology and their language describing, you know, what they were doing religiously and culturally was not so overt. Today, it's, you know, it's completely overt, and, you know, there's a clear, you know, definition with some of our society here in America, you know, about their intent to intertwine, you know, that this intertwined culture and religion is what to, you know, is going to move us forward in America. You know, I mean, right now, if I can say clean this up a little bit, but right now it seems like there's a certain European culture that is closely intertwined with religion, and they're trying to, you know, maintain status quo and keep America, you know, more closely related to, you know, more closely tied to this culture and religion than, you know, than having any other multiple cultures or religions, you know, exist or, you know, begin to change what America looks like.
You know, as you were talking about that, and this just popped in my head, so just off the top of my head, perhaps a different perspective. I think maybe people watched what's happened over the past few years and have realized finally, you know, not just a small group of people who were like, you guys don't see this is all broken and going to shit, right? But now the larger group of people looked around and realized that, hey, the wheels are falling off this wagon. And I think one of the most natural instincts in that case is to revert to what you thought you previously knew worked.
Mhm.
And I think in a lot of those people's minds, what previously worked in this country was the merger of those two things, was when it was, God, country, family, right?
Yeah, that seems a strategy people use for any time of crisis. Whenever, especially societal or any kind of breakdown, you go back to the last time things were working, because that seems to be where you went astray. And not saying that that was the ideal time or
We have save
that.
points in all of our games, right?
Right, right. That's a great way to look at it.
But I don't know if like in America, if like you're talking about, well, a lot of the people that are actually, making the most noise about, I guess what I'm specifically talking to is Christian nationalism. That is, seems to be more, prevalent in our society today than it was, 10 years ago. At least there are more people, willing to express, that they are Christian nationalists now than maybe they were 10 years ago. But, it seems to me like it's not a defensive thing that, like they're afraid of something. Well, these people are definitely afraid.
No,
But
it's
it's not
defensive
like,
from the bottom up. It's defensive from the local populace. It's not defensive from the people who are actually spouting this stuff. The people who are
Right.
spouting this stuff are just charlatans, like they've always been. The Latin language defined politics as many blood-sucking critters. They knew it a long time ago.
yeah, right.
So these are just charlatans peddling whatever is going to get them, the most hip hip hurrah. And because the people are afraid, they are reverting to what they know, or what they think they know is the next best solution, or the last working solution, the save state, which is, hey, there was a merger of this once upon a time, and we were the best in the world because, one, that was the propaganda they were fed, but two, it was true in a few instances, right? Especially for their ability to actually succeed in life and grow in life and have opportunities and all of this stuff. So, that default mode, that save state, I think it's a strong psychological factor in this whole equation.
Yeah, I think it plays on everybody wants things to be better. And when you think of better, you think of wholesome. You think of like less crime, you think of less corruption, and not that those two things are 100% congruent with returning to the church or whatever.
Well, they're not.
Right.
They're not at all. For any student of these systems, right? They're not at all. But but the perception is there because the narrative had the ability to be controlled.
Yeah, I often think, like, taking it back to psychedelics in the church, like, with my limited understanding of previous ideas about religion, it seems to me that Christianity on some level was a sect, and there's plenty of evidence to support that Jesus thought that God resided within you, and you shouldn't have to go to a house of worship, that you shouldn't have to go and be in front of everyone, and you should be able to celebrate and pray right inside your own heart, inside your own house. And so my idea of the psychedelic tradition returning to Christianity would be that idea that God resides within you. And we get back to the bottom up. Like right now, it's this authoritarian idea. All of our societies seem to be based on authoritarianism, where it comes from the top down. There is this level. But in reality, if we flip the pyramid over, it should be those on, the most up here should make the rules, and then it should flow down. And so if the people on the bottom began having psychedelic experiences, I think it would shatter some of the walls of the hardcore Christianity or the hardcore Muslims or any hardcore type of religion that is so constricted. I think it blows apart those walls. And when people begin to start asking the questions, like Paul said earlier, when people begin to have sessions with like-minded people and they go, wow, you know what? I'm a little bit more accepting of things. Or, hey, this guy up top here is kind of running his mouth a little crazy. You know what I mean? Like, I think that there's a real chance for Christianity and other religions to turn to their roots. And if we look at, some of the greatest thinkers of all times who said that religion was more of a finger pointing to the moon. It doesn't matter if that's a Muslim finger or a Christian finger, it's pointing to the moon, and we should be pointing towards the ideals. And that was my aspect of what would happen if we reintroduce the psychedelic experience. What if everybody could see the burning bush? What if everyone could see the chariot? Might they then have a return to the kingdom is all around us?
I mean, I think it's an excellent hypothesis. I really do. I think when we really put a magnifying glass on it, I think we have to ask a couple questions. One, you referenced, Christianity and Islam, but you also have Judaism in that, which are
right.
the Abrahamic religions, right?
Right.
Those seem to be fairly well derived from Zoroastrianism, which was kind of an extension of, a whole bunch of the most ancient stuff from Sumeria, Egypt, Babylon, Assyria. All of those stuff was kind of compiled into those types of things. And then monotheism was introduced at the Zoroastrianism level. I think I was listening to something today, the Dead Sea Scrolls, they recovered one text that isn't in any of the official Torahs.
Torah.
Yeah, the Hebrew Torahs. And that in that section of text basically indicated that, it was a part of Deuteronomy, and it basically indicated where God was disseminating land to the lesser gods or other gods, one of them called Yahweh, and he got the land of Jacob, i.e. Israel. And that was actually something that was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So I think we're starting to piece more and more pieces of this puzzle as we go back, that there is a confluence of many different religions and ancient, symbology and rituals and ceremonies that went into all of this. And then to fast forward that all into now, and to give somebody a whole heap of mushrooms and say, welcome to the reality of the world. I think you're going to end up with in a dangerous situation for a lot of people. Don't get me wrong. I appreciate the sentiment. I like it. I've had I've had fantasies in my younger days about, what would happen if I went to that big old youth night, right, and just spiked the punch. Just LSD and a punch. What would that do to people? And I've had that thought experiment to myself, which is a horrible thought experiment. But at the same time, it's an interesting one, and then usually I concluded that, yeah, probably a lot of people would go insane. And then upon doing some research in history, we kind of have some evidence to suggest what would happen, right? Back in the medieval days, when they were using rye bread and they were keeping it in those monasteries, they would get ergot poisoning, which is basically just a precursor to LSD, but has a lot more toxicity effects and makes you think like you're dying. And so it puts you into a pretty bad trip, and people start to see the devil and witches and all sorts of things, and they start murdering each other. So, we do have a little bit of evidence to suggest this might not be the best idea. But, George, in the Church of George, you do you, brother.
I'm coming from a good place.
I don't like the idea of
creating disciples.
Now with with like people are getting into experimenting with all different types of hallucinogenic medicines, and and people are like, oh well, I'll be your shaman, I'll be your coach, I'll be your guide, and to me, I've never really thought about it, but it just never really sat too well with me. I kind of think that it's a personal journey, and
it is.
And when you begin, these experimenting with this stuff, that I feel like you'd be doing yourself a disservice if you had somebody there, like, telling you like, this is what you should be feeling, or what you're feeling is okay, or what you're feeling is not normal, or, any of these different things, you know. So like when you talk about like this, you know, freaking mushroom night with Father Joseph, you know, I just kind of go like, this doesn't sound right, you know. I mean, in any type of you know, religion, whether it's Christianity or Judaism or Islam or Buddhism or whatever, you know, it's you know, I think it's something that everybody has to go through on their own, you know, the good and the bad, and you work it out and you figure it out for yourself, and it doesn't happen in you know, one night, 2 nights, 3 nights. It takes time, and I think that outside interference only inhibits, you know, your internal growth when using these medicines.
I would typically agree with you. I think in all ages there are people who are called to actually facilitate the people who do have a need, to have a mentor, to have a shaman, to have a guide. At the same time, the second you start putting price tags on any of this stuff, is a pretty damn fine sign that that's the path that you do not want to go down. If you start monetizing medicine, especially this type of medicine, you're going to lead people down the wrong path eventually. And it's not like, yeah, there's some side effects from pharmacology and stuff like that, but this is like side effects that happen to not just them, but the family and all sorts. You know, it could be pretty detrimental. Which is, you know, George has asked the question before is, you know, do you have somebody who's like in a clinical setting with this, administering this and saying, hey, this is going to be your experience. You should feel this. And if you feel this, you should, you know, think about this, breathe this way. Or do you have somebody who is familiar intimately with those experiences and knows the person? Well, I mean, you know, it's a pretty simple answer. If you're thinking about it logically, you want somebody who's intimate with the experience as much as the information is possible to try to make a successful outcome to a problem or a potential problem. But I think we are, you know, now we're going to see that. And, you know, we might see the blowback that George talks about because of that. You know, all it takes is a couple highly publicized bad trials and it all goes to pot pretty quick.
You know, I think it's important to note too, like at least in North America, like we're a lot of drug addicts, you know, whether it's Adderall, modafinil, or SSRIs. Yeah, okay. And so now I was talking to a person just a couple of days ago that had done a lot of Adderall, and they're getting ready to go and have a psychedelic experience. And on one level, I'm excited for them because I think it'll help them get over the Adderall, because while Adderall can be extremely effective for people with certain conditions, it's also really hard on your body. It's basically like meth, right? And I think it's actually made from like the same salt.
It's an amphetamine. Yeah.
Exactly. And so, you know, when you move, if you're already on like a pretty hardcore amphetamine, and then you're moving, all of a sudden you're going to have this psychedelic therapy, like that person who's on a lot of Adderall, who's on a lot of drugs or on a heavy drug like that, that person already has some mental issues that they're on that drug for. You know what I mean? And so when you have, like, here comes the question, like, okay, if a person that has some disorders is seeking to get rid of those disorders through psychedelics, at what level do they need a therapist? Because they probably needed a therapist to get prescribed that drug. And does the person they go to a new therapist who's going to program them through their psychedelic experience, which is, you know, it's almost like a hypnotism in a way. Then we're back to the placebo, like that you talked about.
Well, and this is the problem of when medicine meets society and it's monetized. Because now instead of us actually trying to determine the best path, the best course for this person, it becomes a question of you know, accreditations, certificates, published articles, published scientific papers, all of this litany of other things that don't actually at the end of the day matter. Yes, they might influence the ability of that person to be able to come to a proper solution, but the proper solution is the proper solution regardless of the credentials and accreditations. And our society is not built in a way that will allow
Mm.
That sort of influence. That's why people have to go to Peru. That's why people are down in Mexico. That's why people are going to Costa Rica, is because there is so much liability in this litigious society that even if you do decide to test the waters, you could end up shit creek without a paddle for the rest of your life. And, that gamble, in the factor of the entire equation really makes it kind of an untenable situation. So there's a lot of hurdles to overcome when we're talking about all this stuff that are much more, probably the largest hurdles are those that are driven via the established system that we have in place today.
Yeah, it makes sense, man.
I agree. It's a great point. Sometimes the legalization of the system brings with it the legalization brings commercialization, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And regulation, and then certification,
and then corruption,
and then corruption.
Well, it's like the natural progress of just trying to get ahead of the next guy, right?
Yeah.
It's
Right.
like you want to get rich. You got to do one of two things: define an industry or get in the middle of something that's already working.
Right, and the race to the bottom, because that's all it is when you get in the middle of those industries, all it is a race to the bottom. Oh, we can provide this better service because we're not going to actually pay people to do the job. We have an AI system that can do the job, right? These things become a race to the bottom. Eventually, the next guy's going to have the AI system too. Eventually, all these things become super, super cheap. So we need to figure out how to charge for something else. But in that race to the bottom, the quality falls through the floor. The ability to actually service what was initially started falls through the floor. However, the shareholders in that course of time profit tremendously.
Yeah.
And that is ultimately one of the foundational problems facing our society at scale today.
Okay, this brings up an idea in that vein. Do you see the freedom, do you think that the freedom we have is just an interlude that is felt from passing from one way of living to another? Like, we have had this idea of a republic, and we had this idea that we were free for a while. And now it seems we're charging full steam into a technocratic takeover. And it seems like maybe this idea of freedom, either the idea of freedom is changing or the idea of freedom is vanishing. Do you guys see it that way?
Go ahead, Paul, if you got some.
No, I was just, trying to digest George's question right there. And I know you posted that onto our chat, I don't know, George, if we went back 100 years and we were talking to Americans about freedom and, what it meant to them and how they would define it, if we would actually have the same definitions, or have the same understanding of what freedom is. I think the more constraints that are put on people, the more freedom matters. But I think they also, seek freedom in all the wrong places. Meaning, the small choices that people are, able to make, Coke or Pepsi, these little tiny things that
Right.
people think that, is actually, like I live in a country of choice. I live in a place where there's freedom and then you see like there's always been this idea of like, keeping things that are extreme as freedoms, and people view them as extremes, whether that may be like gun, pornography, and some of the more extreme aspects of our society, while they erode our everyday freedoms away from us, but we still view ourselves as being like, hey, I live in this country where we can have guns and we can watch pornography on any street corner, so I live in the freest place in the world. And so I think too that there's just a lot of, like, at least here in America, that if you ask Americans like what freedom is, I don't even know if they could define what freedom is. So I don't know if that, I don't think that answers your question, George, but I think it's No,
Well,
it's,
I think it paints the foundation for an answer. And you touched on it. Freedom by itself is, there's no such thing as freedom. If there was true unadulterated freedom, particles could go in any which shape, direction, and form, and nothing around us would exist.
chaos.
It would be utter chaos. So there's order amongst that chaos, and so there's a natural necessity to the limitations of freedom. And then when you kind of extrapolate that down to the person, you touched on it too. You said freedom of choice, and we have the freedom of choice. And our freedom of choice is going to be limited and expanded in any given moment by the previous moments and the choices of others. And some of those choices we have no ability to influence. Other choices, like if we're going to eat chicken or a hamburger tonight, we have a lot of ability to influence, potentially. But so there has to be a definition of terms, and I think when a lot of these conversations come up about liberty and freedom and all of these stuff, freedom is one thing, but if we're just taking freedom at the name of or at the definition of the word, can I come steal your chicken? Well, I don't appreciate you stealing my chicken. I don't think that that's a good idea. Yeah, I guess you're free to do it. You're free to make that choice, but you're not free from the consequences. And so there has to be more definitions to this conversation. You can't just stop at, hey, hurrah, freedom. There's freedom of choice, and then there's the responsibility of consequence. And the responsibility of consequence is the reflection of our choices into the world. And I think that's a very important conversation that's just not had at all these days. Personal responsibility is something that we do not exonerate in in this Western society. If you get in trouble as a kid, it's appeal to authority. It's go talk to the principal. If you have a problem on the street, it's call the police. If if you can't deal with something, you call somebody. We don't have this overbearing sense of personal responsibility that somebody who was pioneering the West would have had. Now, there's something to be said about not having that burden, but there's also something to be said about being aware and acknowledgement of how we should be living in context of the world. And I think that's an important conversation that we just don't have a lot of today.
Yeah, it's almost completely gone from the lexicon, and I really think that every conversation should start by defining your terms, and it's too bad that doesn't happen. And even like I'm guilty of it as well. And I think
we're
that's
guilty of it.
Yeah. I it seems to me that, and maybe it's always been this way, maybe it's just a limitation of my experience, but it seems that there's less in like the freedom of can is what I had written down. Like, and it gets back to, yes, you can go steal my chicken, especially if you're the guy with the guns, then you can do it. And the people at the top are using the word freedom to tell the people on the bottom, like, look, you're free. You can do whatever you want. But by doing that, they are shifting the responsibility of their actions onto the lower class. Look, we're all free people. You know what? You're free to leave this job you're making $30. You can leave if you want to, but
Right.
but what about your family? What about your kids? What about your food? What about interest rates? Oh, well, you're free to do it. What, are you afraid? You're a big chicken? You know what I mean? You're scared to do it. You have the same freedom I have. I just happen to have guns and millions of dollars. We're essentially equal, and like this.
That was good. I like that. That was a nice icing on the cake right there. Yeah, we're essentially equal, right?
So it's paper. That's all that separates us, okay? But like this idea of freedom that's what I mean. Like it's being used against the very people that claim they love it, and that's what bothers me.
Oh, 100% it is, because you have to, along with the bread and circus, you have to provide hope, right? and hope is that we're better than everybody else, for one, right? You have to be able to sell that message. But the hope is that the hope for the future generations, they're going to be prosperous beyond our wildest imaginations. And so it becomes this impetus to kind of sell this, this false reality. And that's where you get a lot of, the propagandas, the narratives. You get the state usurping industry. You get a lot of these things because in order to provide that future that they proclaim, which, is pretty unreasonable usually if you look at a lot of the proclamations of the state, they have to, try to take all of these resources in order to make this a reality. And usually what ends up happening is you get a few really shitty monuments and the eradication of a nation.
Well put. A few shitty monuments. Oh,
some people might talk about it in a few thousand years, but
Yeah, right.
Another point to this guy. I'm gonna show you the book. I don't know. Oh, this book I was reading right here. It's Byung-Chul Han. If anybody can see this, it's really interesting, and he goes on to talk about, like, in the same transformation, the way we're talking about freedom and some of these things happening in our communities. He talks about how a lot of the world today, under the authoritarian rule or under most governments, has gone from the idea of like subjugation as rulers and subjects, the people being subjects, to transforming the individual into their own project. So if you think of how a king may look at his subjects, the king at some point could be in trouble because his subjects could rebel against him, and the governments, the subjects could rebel if times are tough, and they subjected to all kinds of things. However, if you begin to transform the subjects into their own projects, then they lose.
Have their own problems.
They're no longer have someone to rebel against because it's their fault. And if you look at, and so this is where it kind of been like, this is where I fall into a question, because when we talk about people not taking responsibility for their lives, if we become our own project, people stop blaming. It seems it's possible that people could stop blaming the system or society for their problems, which might be good in some ways. But like you said, what percentage of people really pull themselves up and become millionaires from somebody that was born from, you know what I mean? Like, what's that? You see the quagmire there?
In defining our terms, I think we should also define our measurements. Okay. Success in this system, for instance, is people becoming millionaires actually success? Is somebody having the ability to be their own project the aspect of freedom, or is it the illusion that you give somebody to perceive their freedom so that, it's the carrot on the stick? Yeah. And I think if we were being honest and fair, I think it's more of a carrot on the stick.
Absolutely.
What's the structure surrounding this? People being their own project.
Well, if you look at this world where, like, say a TikTok star or a YouTuber, like, there's this transition into the individual. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I think it's actually directly related to debt.
Okay.
So we indebted the individual as opposed to indebting the state, right?
Mm.
And then the individual is now their own project with their own debt. It's kind of this nationalistic thing wrapped up into the individual. You're indebted. You have to pay off your house. You have to pay off the car. But if you do, you achieve these things. You have ownership, right? And we attach these ideals to that. And so I think it's really derived from the debt-based economic system that we have.
Yeah, that's well put. Especially a collapsing system like we have. What better way to transfer all the guilt and all the responsibility out of the individual instead of the people that have built this?
Who made the choices?
Right. The few great monuments.
On George.
What's that, Paul?
We have a collapsing system. I wasn't aware.
Yeah. It appears things are not as strong as they seem.
I mean, it's just like, people have been saying, like, California is going to collapse. They've been saying that for like 60 years.
Well, I think you've seen
You
a
know,
slow motion train wreck there, right? Like I would look for California when you see what's happening with the energy there, the hostile takeover by corporations that have taken over the state. I think the next shoe to drop there is going to be the water. I think you're going to see the same thing happen with energy right now across the world. The next shoe to drop is water. Everything that's happening with energy right now, guess what? It's coming from water because the privatization of all resources is what is slowly coming down the pipe. And you're seeing it with energy, you're seeing it with food, and the next you're going to see it with water.
Well, and expanding upon that, California was always said it was going to fall off the cliff, but the United States system said, "Oh, you're going to fall off the cliff too." By all rational means, if you're studying economics, supply and demand, all these things that we kind of hold as tenets to economics, like in order to kick the can down the road, you would have to just exert untold amounts of control. Well, fast forward 20 years, and it's like, oh, you exerted untold amounts of control. And now all of a sudden we're in a system where, people are now able to see that, oh, yes, it is this massive network of money and a debt-based system that embroils every single country on the planet that is actually the driving thing behind this. And there actually are a small few group of players in that system who dictate policy for the greater whole of people. That's kind of a novel thing. It's always been conspiracy theory prior to the advent of the internet, but now, via public records and a bit of analytics, and you're there. I mean, you can see where the money moves to support all of these infrastructures, all of these policy changes, all of these regulations. Who's funded in what country? What PACs and super PACs or their equivalents in other countries are paying for all of the media coverage, are paying for all of the propaganda. It's a pretty telling tale. I don't think we need to go too deep into it because if you just do the research, you get there. You're right.
No, I think we have a legitimate point right here. See, I think that Paul thinks a lot of this is conspiracy theory. And I think that, Ben, you might be able to point out some areas that are in contention with what Paul thinks. Paul, would you be so kind as to share some of the stuff that maybe you think may not be accurate?
About Ben's statement?
Yeah.
Or like, well, I mean, I just don't think like there's this puppet master or...
No, there's not a puppet master.
That there's a few puppet masters out there that are, that are controlling how everything works. I think, if you look at like, human needs, supply and demand, that a lot of these things are predictable, which then would kind of like, lay waste to the conspiracy theory that, that there are a few things that are controlling society.
It's not a singular cabal. It's a group of.
Let's make it known that Ben was the first person to use the word cabal on this podcast.
Hey, well, I'm just trying to frame things properly. So it's not a singular group of people, but it is. Now we do have the records to show that where the money has flowed from, where the people stood on stage and initially said that this should be the policy of the world. We have that chain of custody of events. And so when you can start to derive those chains of custody, then you have to look at the greater situation and go, okay, well, yeah, there is a smaller group of people controlling most of what's happening in the world. And then if you think about it logically, and you look back to the times of kings and rulers and emperors, and you say, well, would the people who accumulated all of that wealth and all of that power just let it go? Well, the answer is no. We know humans, right? And so what sort of things would they institute in order to maintain and propagate their power? Well, you would have things like an international banking system, because now you can incur debt to people at exorbitant rates. And oftentimes of strife and need and struggle, so you can gouge them while you're also funding their competitor in whatever thing that you might be embroiled in. And now we have records that show us that there has been massive investments on both sides of just about every conflict that we have decent record keeping of, uh, to show that people play both sides to make a lot of money. It's an age old practice at this point, and the people who employ that practice, huh?
I think history has shown when it comes to like conflicts and like financial institutions, you know, funding both sides. I think it's, you know, a lot of that is just, you know, hedge betting. And
It doesn't matter though, but it still has the same net effect as that they make more money and consolidate power. That's the whole idea behind the hedge.
Right, but there's going to be a loser, and so do you want to be out there with, you know, $100 million with the person who loses, or do you want to be out there with $100 million on both sides, and
Which is why,
and knowing that the person who wins is not only going to pay his $100,000 back, but he'll also cover the debt of the person that he just defeated.
Exactly, which is why you have, you know, media companies. There's 6 controlling companies for 90% of the media that's broadcasted around the planet, and so now you have the consolidation of power through, you know, the distribution of resources and information, and that's why now all of a sudden, you know, in 1920, 100% of the GDP across the globe was from commodities. 23% of the GDP in countries today is from financial services. It's speculating on all of this stuff, right? You know, so there's an articulable connection between all of these things, and that connection is that there is small groups of people. There's not a singular individual. It's not a singular cabal. It's not anything like that. There is competing interests of very concentrated resources of power that have their own idea of what the future should be. And we are actually, I think, seeing the contention of quite a few of those systems of power coming to a head right now.
Yeah, I would look, if just taking Ukraine, for example, like how much money has the United States taken from the taxpayer in the last year? Like, I don't know, like $100 billion out of
More than that. A lot
yeah, more
more
than
than
that. Probably 700. I don't know for sure, but I just keep seeing these 100. Yeah, I keep seeing these $1 billion packages and outrage, but it gets suppressed. Like, why do we have people in Flint, Michigan with no clean drinking water, but we can take $100 billion that hasn't even been appropriated and just send it to a foreign country that we have no business being in? Like, what? And then now interest rates over here go up. Like, why are we like that? Just fits the example of, here's this group of people that want to pay for something. Okay, let's use their money to do it, and we'll buy that. And then if we win this land, we'll take the resource underneath it. If we lose, fuck it, it's not our money.
Well, and to fill in that picture even more, you have the people who are saying, yeah, we're going to do this, and the people who they're taking the money from. But in between there, they're profiting because they're invested in the companies who are producing all of the military equipment. They're invested in the banks. They're invested in all of these things along this pipeline of supply that's needed to enable this type of behavior.
Yeah, I would say what you're saying in Ukraine is a real world negotiation between the powers. That's why you see, like, we'll use nukes. No, fuck you, we'll use nukes. These are the big boys sitting at the table discussing the supply chains for the next 100 years. And think of mafia families. They're sitting down. Go ahead. You know what? I will murder all my people. Go ahead. You know what? I don't fucking care. Like, that's what they're saying right now. And like, that's why there's money moving back and forth. That's why there's talks of nukes being back and forth. That's why there's all this blow up of people. And you can see the pieces on the board moving. Like, okay, fucking.
Yeah, and you also see the explosions of excitement in other locations too.
Yep.
You're seeing the reemergence of, you know, older feuds like Armenia and Azerbaijan, with Turkey obviously a player in there. You're seeing, you know, Tajikistan and Kazakhstan and the ethnic distribution there. You have Yemen still happening. You have Somalia. You have you know, things breaking out down in Argentina. Venezuela just is going through another hotspot. So I think, I think this happens whenever you see power structures start to wane, right?
Yeah.
As soon as you see, well, daddy doesn't have his finger on everything. Maybe I can get away with something. That's the first time the kid's going to try to get away with something. You know, daddy's preoccupied. Well, here we go. You know, and we're talking realistically, we're talking 70, 80 years of kind of global oppression in a sense. And
Look
now,
at the yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, look at how fast the transition of power went from the queen being dropped in the hole to the king being signed. Like traditionally, when the monarch dies, there's chaos. And isn't it interesting that the Commonwealth was locked down the hardest during COVID? Australia locked down, Canada locked down. Like they knew she was going to die. And they know that not everybody loves that guy as a king. And traditionally, Canada, if they didn't have Justin Trudeau or their WEF people in there, like, why isn't Australia going, what the fuck do we need a monarch for? They just died. Let's cut all our stuff. Canada, look, why we don't need them anymore. Like, that's why you're seeing so much threatening going on. Like, the people in positions of authority know Canada doesn't need them. Australia doesn't need the queen. Like, what the hell do they need them for?
It raises a question that people never really ever thought about before.
Right.
Right? They're all of a sudden they're like, oh, I had a queen. Why the fuck do I need a monarch?
Yeah, right.
Well, that question hasn't been asked in 70 some years in a lot of these countries. That's a dangerous question, historically speaking, right? So, yeah.
And like, is there, you know what? I talked to a gentleman yesterday who was saying that he, regardless of what you think of the queen, watching the funeral was amazing because of the symbology. You know, they're performing a ritual that hasn't happened in 70 years. And when it did, they follow almost to the T the same method that happened the last time the monarch died. So you're getting to get a snapshot of what happened. Yeah, and it's fascinating. Of culture and religion.
Right.
And that begs the question of, like, you know, when a queen dies, does that wipe out the debts of the people? Was there normally a jubilee? Like, we don't get to know that part, but maybe, you know, they don't want you digging too deep into that, you know. And I guarantee you there's some contracts. There's stuff like that. This is good till I die. This is good till my daughter dies. Like, it might go back generations, you know. You know, you have the East India Trading Company. Hey, are some shares supposed to change hands when she dies? Does this part of the family get something?
Well,
and you see this.
They have all separate corporations. Yeah,
that's right.
I mean, within England, you've seen some of that. You've seen, like, you know, well, King Charles now is like handed stuff off to, you know, to his oldest son. You know, that was well, I don't know if it's tax free, probably, but
without a doubt,
you know, but you know, hand this stuff over to us because traditionally that's what happened. You know, it was handed to him, he handed on to his kid. You know, one day his kid will be king and hand it on to, you know, one of his kids. You know, I mean, that's just, you know, that's how these things roll.
He handed off the people's property to him. Like, they just took all the people's property and gave it to his kid. Like, I'd be pissed off. I was predicting, whoa. I think we should have some of that back.
Yeah, what's the divine right, George?
One of the worst arguments I've ever heard in my life is, we're going to do this because this is the way we've always done this. God, that thing bugs me. Like, wow, okay, because everything changes. So we're just going to go against everything. All right, I have to leave.
So I have an idea as Americans. I think that Prince Harry has moved over here. I think we should back him and take over the monarchy. Just take it over, and then we can divvy up some of the parts for Americans. We can make it new America.
See, when you start playing the game, you become part of. You
become one of them. Yeah. Right.
The idea is you need to pioneer a new game, otherwise you fall into the same ruts.
You can't beat the person that holds all the property. It's like the game of Risk, right? You can't just jump in and win.
Well, even if you do, you think about it, you become that person.
Yeah, it's
even
true.
Even if you're the most altruistic, philanthropic person, you still become that person in essence, because you just inherited all this stuff that was, by and large, forcibly removed from many, many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. Yeah, you are entwined upon that. You know, you could probably try to make amends and you could give it all away, and sure, but you're still a part of that thing. And even if you gave it all away, are you going to make things better? You're probably not, because now you're giving it away under the impetus that, you know, I need to give it away to fix something. You're not trying to find a real solution. You're trying to fix past transgressions. And I think it becomes pretty untenable.
ultimately that has to lead to destruction. Like if you think about where the king and queen are at, like is crazy or is evil or is angry or is silly, whatever I think about them, the reason they're like they are a product of all the decisions they've made, and a lot of those decisions were made to protect what they had. But it seems like you're slowly backing yourself into this corner, right?
Yeah, eventually you run out of room. And
Right.
I think we're seeing that, you know, especially when you have the whole world changed probably a couple times since the Queen took power, right? If you were to kind of break down, you know, the evolution of Western society. Um, and now all of a sudden you're throwing back this hallmark to older days where people were much more visually and viscerally oppressed. And now you're saying, hark, the new king, hail to the king, hail to the king. Now people go, whoa, wait a second. King? Who?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. I need to actually think about this. And that's always been the bane of all monarchy, right? The disacknowledgement of the power structure.
Yeah, that gets back to what we were kind of talking about a few podcasts ago about just deciding not to play the game. You know, like, you know what? I don't think I'm gonna believe in that anymore. And it's weird. I recently saw a video of these two guys, and they were it was pretty funny. They were at a protest or something, and like this cop came over to talk to them about something, and they were talking about Taco Bell, and the guy's like, "Oh man, I love burrito supremes, man. I can't believe they're like $2 now." And the cop comes into the picture, and she's like, "Can I talk to you, gentlemen?" And one guy's like, "You know, I used to like them, but ever since they changed some of the ingredients, I just don't like them anymore." And the cop is like, "I need to talk to you about what just happened." And the guy's like, "You know, all I want is a good burrito. That thing's like $3.99, man. I just want to come home, maybe drink a beer." And the cop is just trying to talk to her, but she can't. Like they just ignore her completely. And you can see this look of dumbfounded. She's like, "I need to talk to you now." And they're like, I like the tacos. What do you think about Jack in the Box?" And they just had this conversation that completely excluded the cop. The video cut off, but it must have been like 5 or 10 minutes of them just ignoring her. And then in the end, it was like, you have a choice to participate or you have a choice to talk about things. You don't have to do it. It made me think of what you were saying kind of about, you know, the different projects going on and the idea to change the game by not participating in it.
Right. Well, you know, that's actually your constitutional right. Most people don't know that. If a cop comes up to you and asks you questions, unless you're being actively detained and you're on public property and you're not on private property, you don't have to say anything. You could talk about Taco Bell all night long. You don't have to acknowledge the cop, which is, you know, not to say that you're not going to have negative repercussions from that just because of the way, you know, the world is these days. And, you know, it's, there's wild videos out there. I just recently found this where people, you know, are using their Fourth Amendment rights, and, you know, I don't have to produce ID because I'm not detained, and and the reaction on, you know, many police officers clearly did not even know what the Fourth Amendment is. They probably only knew what the First and Second were, kind of the looks of it, because their reactions went from, "Oh my God, I can't believe somebody's disrespecting my authority," to eventually they got corrected to, "Oh crap, I hope I don't lose my job." Which is a wild range of emotions if you think about it, right? I'm God, I'm nothing. Oh crap. Oh geez.
What's your take on that, Paul? You're being quiet over there. What's going on?
I'm just kind of listening.
Nice.
I'll be right back.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Paul, what do you think about in today's world? Do you think that more or less people have purpose-free friendships?
All right, so you gotta have to define purpose-free friendship.
Well, so what I mean by that is, like, I can even see it in myself sometimes. Like, it seems that the deeper you go into like money, or the more you climb up the ladder of the corporate ladder, it seems like the people you hang out with are people that you're doing business with. Like, they're not your friends because they're your friends. They're not somebody that you knew in high school that you just call up from time to time to talk about how you see the world. They're friends that you call up to talk about which particular product you're going to pursue. it seems to me that maybe it's just getting older, or maybe it is that I don't have a whole lot of friends, that it seems to me that I'm beginning to see more and more people like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're talking to somebody who also doesn't have a lot of friends. You know, and you know, and I have a business partner that I guess I would consider a friend, but we don't do any like friend type stuff, you know.
Yeah.
And it's been my partner for like 10 years now. Um, but like we don't attend each other's birthday parties or, you know, freaking celebrate life, you know. Um, you know, like big things that happen in life for both of us, you know. I can see that, like, well, more and more people are like spending more time, you know, working, and so like the people that they associate with usually tend to be, you know, those who are, you know, within their particular field or whatever they're doing. And so as a society, as we work more and more and more, we have less time to build friendships that, you know, aren't like a part of what we're doing every single day, you know, for most of the day.
Yeah.
So I mean, I could see that being, you know, a thing, but
Yeah,
like
I
purpose-free
agree.
friendship, I don't think I've ever heard of that.
Yeah, I don't know if it really explains the term well. Does that kind of make sense to you, Ben?
What were you defining?
So I was asking Paul, like, it seems to me at least that the more people work and the more we move down the road we're moving down, and I think it is a symptom of the sickness that's kind of been plaguing our country and other countries, and it's this idea of the subject kind of becoming a project, like you, the individual, becoming your own entity. I think that creates less capacity for purpose-free friendship. And what I mean by purpose-free friendship is that, like, you and me and Paul get together and we talk. However, there are lots of people that you only talk to someone because they can do something for you,
Sure.
Especially the higher you go up on the
I got
corporate
you.
ladder and stuff like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, that's a fair chunk of my communications. um, so I would say, I would frame it in a way that I've noticed there has been, to exactly the process you're speaking to, there's been a removal of community.
Mm.
And whether that community be those friendships or be the local community, your neighbor next door for the cup of sugar type idea, you know, we're being continually moved away from community and into this monetization of things, right? You got your DoorDash driver who's delivering your Walgreens stuff these days. So where we've put a price on these things, essentially, via our use of technology. And I think that by and large, because there is this, you know, this side hustle economy, what is taught to people, you know, especially from an entrepreneurial perspective, you know, make your side hustle your passion and become an entrepreneur and all this bullshit. Not that it's bullshit. There is some truth to it, but it is kind of bullshit in the sense of it leads people down a disingenuous path. And that disingenuous path is you approach your life in that way, you will find yourself quickly surrounded by nobody and awful lonely, because the reality is our relationships are much greater than any sort of monetary price tag you could put on it, regardless if that's just the guy you say hi to on the street corner. You know, putting a price tag on that is you can't, because there's going to be that one day, because he's seen you for 20 years, that he says hi in just the right day at just the right time when you're having a terrible day and you're like, you know what, there is consistency in the world. There is actually genuine people in the world. I know this guy, even though I don't know him, but I've known him for 20 freaking years. And he's always said hi to me. He always brings a smile to my face. And damn it, I hate the world today, but I love that guy in the corner. That's
You know,
community. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah. Was having this conversation with some other friends of mine, not work related, a few years ago, about like at some point, we started, like becoming these people where, being busy with work was like a badge of honor.
Mm-hmm.
Where like, hey,
Oh, yeah.
I work 80 hours a week, therefore, like, like,
Hurrah.
my social status should be, like improving here because I work 80 hours a week. And so, it's like people are really proud to say that, well, I've been so busy lately. I'm just really busy. I got all this stuff going on, whether it really amounts to anything or not. It's just about like, I'm doing something. And maybe you're not.
Well,
And yeah, go ahead, man.
can I hop in?
Yeah.
So I think this has a lot to do with attention. Because, there's a similar kind of thing that I remember from my childhood, and I've observed it just in family members growing up and witnessing it. But maybe you guys remember it too, is, whenever the kid broke his arm in class, all the attention. Now, every kid wanted an ailment. Every kid wanted something where they would get all of that attention. And it had nothing to do with the homes that people came from. It seemed to be pretty, across the board, because I felt the same way, and I had a decent home, and it was like, man, what can I do to have attention? And and kids manufactured shit to have attention, all sorts of crazy things. I remember all sorts of funny things, and you would get that attention, and I don't think we grow out of that too much. I think a lot of this is driven by the need to get attention, whether that's, the parental attention, which a lot of psychotherapy is attached to, or, the attention of our peer groups or things like that. I think that we like to be recognized because there is effort exerted. And when we exert effort, it's nice for somebody else to say, hey, I see your effort. Good effort. I mean, that's what team sports are built on, right? I think we have a lot of, as above, so below pieces of evidence that we could look at throughout the scope of society that would really kind of, put this into a greater perspective. But I think a lot of it is derived from attention.
Yeah, it makes sense. If you think about the fruits of that 80-hour work week, it is to get more attention. Like, look at what I bought. Look at my title. Look at me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, the conversation that I was involved with before wasn't about like, look what I bought. It was more about, like, I'm doing something.
Yeah, acknowledge me because of how hard I'm working. He's such a hard worker.
Where we had, 10 presidents ago, there was a guy going, hey, I got to bring America to the 30-hour work week. Like, this 40-hour work week thing is not for Americans. We need more leisure time. We should be able to do everything we want to do in life and only have a 30-hour work week. And, fast forward, almost 100 years from when that guy said that. And, here we are, like, spending so much time working that, so many things in our society are just getting passed over and neglected.
Yeah, those guys tend to get shot.
Yeah. Well, it's a wild thing too. The computers had a similar promise. Remember, the advent of computers was everybody's not going to have to work anymore. You don't need to sit there and file all day. You have a database. All of a sudden, you got 20 people maintaining a database at 80 hours work in a week.
So how would that apply to the Terra project?
Well, so just because that's how a lot of enterprise technology is built, it doesn't mean it's how it has to be built. So just like science, there's been evolutions in database systems and maintaining these things, and you can get to the point where they're very much highly automated in a lot of different regards. And then mostly what it comes down to is if you're able to put all of the information that you put into the database in a consistent manner without error. And that's the bigger key. And so what you do is you basically just have these systems that their whole purpose is to translate data from, say, the indoor vertical farm setup and just put that data into the database in a very consistent way. And then you can go, and then, with all the automatic features of the database, you end up in a position where you're like 99.999, like 5-6 sigma, to the point where you don't have errors. You'll still get errors, but at that rate, you're at a point where it shouldn't detrimentally affect any system, except if you're talking something like a fusion power source or something like that. That's the only thing where you start to need greater and greater accuracy.
Yeah. Gentlemen, I love talking to you guys. I am getting the wave down over here. My 2 hours is coming up, and I got to tell you, man, every Sunday I leave fulfilled. So thank you both for that. I really appreciate it. And I got a lot of questions answered. So let me just start with you, Ben. Where can people find you? What do you got coming up? And what are you excited about?
Well, BenjaminCGeorge.com, fully redesigned, completely filled out. And I'm hoping next week sometime, George, whenever Thursday, Friday, Saturday, sometime, you be my first guest on the No Absolute podcast.
Let's do Thursday, man. I'm in.
All right. Cheers.
Okay. I'll shoot you some info. Dude, first off, if you haven't gone to BenjaminCGeorge.com, check it out. The new site is awesome. Paul, there's all kinds of landing pages, except for yours needs a picture, buddy. So you're going to need to get a hold of Benjamin C. George so we can put your landing page up there.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, my Paul picture is basically what this looks like.
Yeah, they put a B up there.
Well, I think, when I get a boost here in technology, then it'll probably all change.
Well,
nice.
You could become the clean supply of the world. We can make that happen, technologically speaking.
Yeah.
I think Paul has a plan for a picture. Didn't you have a plan for a picture, Paul?
I do, but it continues to change. I can put something up.
Didn't you have a specific person in mind though, from a specific movie?
Yeah, I forget. I told you, yeah. But I forget who that was. Can you remind me?
It was a person that I forgot the movie, man. I remember you telling me about it.
No. It's gonna be the driver from what's that show? Shoot, I can't even remember the name of the show.
Starsky and Hutch?
No, not Starsky and Hutch, but the three British guys that drive cars all around.
Oh, that's right.
Oh, Top Gear.
Top Gear.
Was the old show. Yeah.
Yeah, the old show. The unknown driver guy. What's his name?
The Stig.
Yeah, him.
That'd be perfect.
Yeah, just nice bicycle helmet. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because no one knows who that guy is, right?
We do now.
Yeah, right.
You're the psychedelic Stig.
That's so awesome.
We gave him 12 grams of mushrooms. That was 2 hours ago. Let's see if we can find him. Stig. Oh, he's not here. Anybody know where Stig is?
That sounds like fun.
That would be fun. That actually sounds entertaining. Give a guy in a bicycle helmet a whole bunch of words. Just see what happens.
Put a camera on him, a GoPro up the top.
Exactly. Yeah. One on the chest, one on the head.
Oh, it's classic. All right, gentlemen, I really appreciate it. Thank you for everything, and we'll touch base here shortly. And to everybody watching, thank you for spending some time with us. Hank, thanks for chiming in. And everybody in the chat, we really appreciate it. And we'll talk to everybody soon. All right. Aloha.
Take care.